Hi, and welcome to ForwardKeys and Friends. I'm Olivier Ponti, VP for Insights at ForwardKeys, and I'll be the moderator today. The key theme of our session today, Europe's travel recovery. This is a particularly hot topic as we're approaching the summer season, which is always critical for the travel industry. It's the second summer in times of COVID-19. The stakes are high, and so are the hopes of many tourism businesses who cannot afford to miss out on the reactivation of domestic and international travel. Even if there are still a lot of unknowns regarding the summer season, it's already clear that recovery in Europe is going to be uneven across the continent, taking place at different speeds, and that it will remain highly dependent on decisions made by the respective national governments. To help us appreciate the current situation, we have two well-known travel experts on stage today. We welcome Eduardo Santander, CEO of the European Travel Commission. He's been CEO of this organization since 2012, and he is a true expert when it comes to understanding the state of the European travel industry. Welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for this special edition of ForwardKeys and Friends, we will also be joined by Olivier Jager, CEO and co-founder of ForwardKeys. Olivier will take the lead of this interview. It's going to be a frank meeting of the CEOs, touching on political and sometimes sensitive topics, and I'm sure it's going to be quite exciting. Bienvenue, Olivier.
Merci, Olivier. I didn't know we were switching to French suddenly. I think we're adding to the confusion having two members of the ForwardKeys team with the same name, Olivier. Maybe I should share how we name each other within the company, or maybe not today, some other day, just to avoid this confusion.
We'll do that some other time. We'll do that some other time. So before we start, I'd like to remind our audience that you will receive the recording of this webinar and that there will be a Q&A session in the end. So please drop your questions under the chat button. I'll be monitoring these questions backstage, and we'll come back to ask them to Eduardo and Olivier in the final 15 minutes. So it's time to welcome Eduardo and Olivier. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olivier. Eduardo, thanks very much for playing the game with us this morning. Really enjoy this. I have to say it's my first on this format, so I'm looking forward to this engaging dialogue with you on the EU and its recovery. And essentially, well, I have a first question for you. We are now seeing that we're getting in a better direction. There seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and we see this in our data. We have some projections for the summer that certainly don't look as near as good as 2019, but obviously are in the right direction. But I can't help look in the mirror and say, you know what? It seems to me that in these 16 months, there's a number of mistakes we've made at local level, at EU level. And at the end of the day, personally, as a European, when I say local or Europe, you know, there's hardly any difference for me. But I think that collectively we made lots of mistakes. And I think that under the pressure of this pandemic coming in, we a lot of our states and a lot of us at the end of the day started reacting without coordination, in a belly button type of attitude, and that has not served us, the industry per se. But what do you think?
Well, thank you again for having me, Olivier. I mean, you are mentioning very uncomfortable truths that obviously nobody wants to hear again, and nobody wants to look back to the year 2020. You know, like I remember a year from ago, you know, in these very similar circumstances, you know, where we are well planning our summer holidays, and you know, the trade was asking, you know, what kind of season is this going to be, and you know, what kind of demand is going to be out there. And we start seeing, you know, the symptoms of an illness that it's causing a lot of damage to the travel and tourism ecosystem. You mentioned one of these, which is obviously the lack of coordination. Lack of coordination is nothing very new at the European level. Unfortunately, as we know, you know, tourism is a competence of member states, and some federal member states such as Spain, Germany, and others, you know, are depend also, the tourism is given, the competence of tourism is given even to the regions, and even so the subsidiarity can go even deeper and deeper to even local governments. So I guess we don't want to look too much at what happened in 2020, because that's pretty much on the records. Lack of coordination, harmonization. There was also obviously a lot of discrimination last year, because like there was competitive advantages politically created, and political disadvantage also politically created. And I think that there is a huge difference this year. And again, I would like to look forward. You mentioned that light at the end of the tunnel, which is a very tiny flame, and very vulnerable flame with a lot of winds coming in and out. So I think the big difference this year is that we have two inflection points, which are very clear to everybody probably listening. First of all, the so much criticized vaccination rollout from the European Union and its member states, which ultimately is proving to be a successful story, slow but pretty much safe. With ups and downs, with a very clumsy start in some places, some people not understanding why I'm not getting my shot now, and my neighbor did already, he doesn't travel, I travel every day. I think we are all are getting a little bit of understanding on how difficult is this exercise in terms of logistic, organizational stuff, providing everybody with a fair treatment in sense, on time and space, because that had to be organized in a record time. And this, I would like also to give credit, to the European institutions. Without the European institutions, the situation would have been really chaotic, really a war of vaccines, if you want to call it, in a dramatic Hollywood style. The second inflection point, which is probably very much well known also because of the media and several announcements locally at government levels, but also the European Union, is the implementation of digital tools to facilitate travels. Call it, COVID digital certificate. It was formerly known as digital green certificate. It changed the name, and many other names have been in the market so far. IATA had the travel pass. Anyway, in any case, the use of technology to provide proof of your health, if you want to call it. Some people, I remember to having this dialogue of, and this taxonomy, should we call it passport, pass, certificate? It doesn't matter. It's just a tool to to prove either your proof of immunization, vaccination, or a negative PCR test. And it costs so much political willingness and compromise to arrive to this. And this, again, we have to give credit to the member states that have passed from 2020 in a so-called battle mode for the tourist and for the revenues that comes from tourism, to a very much compromise approach of say, okay, if we don't work together on this, everybody's gonna die anywhere, and it doesn't matter in the end. However, we see again different speeds of, again, vaccinations rollout and implementation of digital solutions. We have now a deadline, which is the beginning of the summer. Some people think that the beginning of the summer should be around 15th of June. So this is a week from now. Some people say, okay, it's 1st of July, and some people think, we're not going to be ready by then. So, let's be realistic. This summer is going to start late. And here is with the whole chaos is starting to happen this year, as we've seen it. Early green sprouts of tourism popping up, in Portugal, popping up in Greece, and in some remote and islands like Madeira or the Balearic Islands. But then everything in a very volatile way, closing, opening, misinformation, government changing their opinion very quick. So the question, and I'm sorry if I answered the question with another question, is this gonna be, again, the way we're gonna deal with this year? I would answer myself, I hope not, and we are gonna do the utmost, at least from ETC side or things, to push for a very much coordinated and harmonized approach this year.
Yeah. No, but I think, the point you're making at the end of the day is, okay, the first 6 to 9 months were pretty much a disaster. At least that's me saying this. But you like to see, to put the spotlight on the last 6 to 9 months, or 6 months, I guess, where a lot of positive decisions were taken jointly, and it hasn't been easy, but there is definitely going in the right direction and should allow us to make it easy to travel, actually. And I think you're right. But before I allow us, if you will, to move into all these positive things and looking forward, there are still some elements where I think we've been lacking coordination. I mean, as a traveler myself, and my families and my friends, we still have these vouchers that some of these airlines were delivering to us when their flights were not able to fly. For a reason you mentioned, which is at the end of the day, at ForwardKeys, we tend to measure demand. I mean, what demand can you measure at the end of the day when it's all about restriction that are taken for the right reason, mostly? So, you know, before we move to tomorrow, should we have a more uniformized, I don't know if that's an English word, by the way, way of putting together or protecting travelers' rights around Europe, based on, you know, for those kinds of situations, so we can have a proper refund and a mechanic so that the airlines don't die reimbursing us. What's your view on this?
Well, there is a huge dichotomy here with you know, consumer protection laws and obviously, you know, the law of, you know, free business, which is obviously to produce profit. And you know, let's face it, Olivier, you know, like tourism has been since the inception of the concept of tourism in Europe, modern tourism, a very much margin profit driven industry, very successful, you know, with exponential growth. You guys work with very reliable numbers. You know, we use your numbers on a daily basis, you know, and we see, you know, that exponential growth in the last, especially in the last 2 decades, which didn't see any end. So you see that part, you know, that we thought that we were invincible, and that created also models, business models that arguably today we could say they were very unsustainable, you know, unsustainable from even from an economic point of view, because the moment you don't have mobility, for instance, and we see, you know, when, you know, flights are not in the air, when airplanes cannot fly and so on, then there is no connectivity between A and B, and therefore both A and B starting to suffer, and the whole value chain behind it is not even about the, you know, the hotel, which obviously suffers the first. Or this is why the tourism industry went from 100 to 0. The only industry worldwide that went, you know, within in stillstand, absolutely nothing, you know, like on hold. Why is that? Because we are also so much dependent of, you know, of decision making that has to do with you know, mobility, but also with policy with regards, you know, to you know, free movement. And I guess something that it has been discussed heavily in the last months is, you know, how much free of mobility really was there. You know, the moment, you know, that we had a problem, we had a crisis, a big crisis, the government looked into themselves, you know, your belly button approach, as you mentioned before, and they stopped thinking about the common good of people and preserving the Schengen area, for instance, which is a very successful story actually to that we use as a benchmark worldwide. And then you know, everybody starts looking, no, you know, I'm gonna cut my deal with the Germans or with the British, you know, and you know, and this doesn't work, you know, unilateral, bilateral, even multilateral decisions last summer didn't work out. They work out just for a few weeks, and there was like a little thing of energy for the entrepreneurs, but then it fainted like smoke. And this is what we see this year. Unless there is like a compromise, and you know, I'm going to refer here to a word which is never used in tourism, which is solidarity, which is, you know, like you have to share the cake this summer. You have to leave people also take their own decisions and not try also to manipulate people's willingness to travel while artificially creating too many different systems, because that will create definitely frustration, confusion, and Olivier, you are an expert on this. Your data will say if people demand is frustrated and confused, something will happen. Sure. There will be a drop on demand for sure.
So you think that when the UK decide that they should not allow the British people to travel to Spain, but yes to Portugal, is by solidarity to Portugal, maybe?
Well, I would not like to claim that, but I would like to think that there should be a principle of, there is classic flows north to south during the summer months, right? And there is a fierce battle, historical battle, for the British tourists, for the German tourists, because there are big
For
markets.
sure.
It's about volume too. And I would say that now in the last weeks there are a lot of decisions that they are not based on scientific evidence, and that scientific evidence is shared among all countries. So it should be very transversal and very horizontal and very transparent. So I don't really understand these kind of decisions from overnight, because that's the killer, for the small and medium-sized enterprise, but also for the hotel chains, because it's not planning, it's in pure improvisation. And yeah, as you say, we live in a society which is pretty well organized when it comes, to hire and fire people. So maybe people in Portugal, arguably, say, okay, we're not open. I'm just gonna hire my staff for the rest of the summer. And now, all this stuff has to be sent home, and maybe they cannot send them home because by law they cannot fire them before so many days and so on. So you see the complexity of things, and this is definitely affecting the social pillars of Europe. And we haven't seen the real impact of this pandemic yet from that social perspective. We're starting to see a lot of symptoms with social upheaval, and people starting to think, okay, that's not okay. So you see that the dimensions here. People think sometimes, that travel is all about leisure and about going on a nice holiday and to have fun. But it goes beyond that. I don't have to defend it in this forum. The importance for the economy, but also the importance for social peace, because it affects so many layers of a society. It's not only the guy making holiday, the guy serving that thing. It seems all the value chain in urban centers, but also in remote places, and also very much the value chain connected to local businesses and entrepreneurs that maybe they would not say they work for tourism, but they supply tourism definitely. So I see that this summer we have a huge test. It's a test first of leadership. Are our governments willing to do that step, that extra effort to compromise and to share? And the second is citizenship, because a part of the equation that have been forgotten is that the traveler has a huge responsibility also this summer too, and it's a behavioral thing. And I know that ForwardKeys does a lot of research also on travel intention, travel perception of destinations, DMOs, and so on. And this is a very, very new equation from all of us, because we used to measure things by quantity, which is 1, 2, 3. It's easy, Even my 3 years old daughter can count already, but it's not about only quantity now. It's to qualify things in terms of safety, perception. Is the place where I'm going, it's gonna be the right thing for my family, or even are they managing good or well this pandemic? So you see, it's one layer of complexity after the other. And this brings me maybe to one of the things that we are analyzing at ETC. It is also the future role of DMOs and destination management companies and associations, and so, because we see this, to analyze demand in the future is becoming a very different and difficult job.
Yeah, well, that takes me to my next question. Essentially, as you mentioned, we're seeing this slide, or we discussed at the beginning. It's still not fostered by demand, but we know demand is there. There are lots of hurdles. But at the end of the day, I think we have to acknowledge that we've all changed during this, I don't know what would be the official word, 15, 16 months, 18 months. And traveler has changed too. Every time we ask around, we do see the desire to travel, but we do also feel that people have changed. So the question somehow is, we're gonna, there might be some differences in when we get back to a normal situation. And what I'd like to discuss with you a little bit is what could be these differences, if you will. For example, there a new initiative here in Spain to invest, thanks to the EU Next Gen Fund, a lot of money to improve tourism and also to build more data, if you will. But at the heart of this strategy, there is converting the DMO as a service. So we know the DMO very much as a promoter, but apparently here in Spain, and I think I'm illustrating my question with that Spanish example. There is a sense here that the DMO's role needs to evolve and become much more active, much more proactive. What do you see the role of a DMO, in 2 years from now, after this is all behind us? What's your opinion on this?
My opinion is that there's going to be a massive change, and it's a change that comes naturally by force majeure, if you want to call it that way. We knew that we had to do adjustments in the future, but nobody wanted to change, a very well functioning machine. Like I said, why should I change? Look at my books. They're black numbers. They're growing numbers. In the last 3 decades. So the question at glance is, and you mentioned that it's not about data and gathering data. I think the role of DMOs in the future is going to be the translators of data into right management, right development, product development, but also in right educational policies. Because believe me or not, all the whole equation, supply demand, has to do with educating both. I remember when we started approaching the Chinese market, 15 years ago, we didn't know much about the behavior of Chinese, and they didn't know anything about Europe. So we had to do a huge, and it's a job that we did with you, ForwardKeys, for the EU-China tourism year 2018. That we had to explore much in depth in terms of qualitative data and how the perception of Chinese of different destinations. Yes, before prescribe them what they have to do in Europe, in form of a vacational package. And this is a cumbersome process when you don't have everybody aligned here. Education for me is key in the changing role of DMOs. I think they can evolve. You don't have to change them. You don't have to rename them. I think, we are all growing big. We are growing old too. And Europe is growing very old as a destination. And I think the question that we have to answer ourselves is whether after pandemic, Europe should remain the first destination worldwide in terms of arrivals, bed nights, expenditure, or the best, which has to do with competitiveness. Exactly. And this is a very, very different story. And when it comes to competitiveness, and within Europe, we have a vast variety of destinations. We have very established, mature destinations and very young ones. My feeling right now, and I work with 33 countries, and that they are in so different life cycle with regards to tourism development. I think the agility of response is so different, between them, if you compare them. And here is when the competitiveness is going to come, because to change is a cumbersome process when it comes also to infrastructure. I refer to my home country in Spain, or even France or Italy. Obviously, top 3 if you want it in the mind of visitors worldwide. And they've been the holy trinity for decades, right? But the reality of these countries, they have hard infrastructure, very much embedded in places that have been defined by tourism for the last 3-4 decades. And now you have to redistribute, fight seasonality. You have to tackle issues of sustainability in the 3 layers of sustainability, being socially, economically, environmentally, versus destinations that they are just starting, or they started just a decade ago, and they don't have the amount of hard infrastructure, so they only build some places for tourism, and they can maybe adapt quicker. And you see in that kind of scheme of who is gonna, again, adapting quick, that's where the new competition is gonna be. It's who is more able to adapt quicker, because here it's pure Darwinism, and we've talked about this, Olivier, in other occasions. It's adapt or die, and dying in tourism means not being competitive. People don't visit your place, or your place, is not attractive enough to compete, with your classic competitors. And this is what we're seeing right now, that even the pandemic is bringing new schemes of competition. We see that people discover places around their homes, the famous staycations, the famous domestic travel that we've been talking about for 6 months now. But this is a truth that it's gonna stay for longer here with us, because people, this kind of fear to pandemic or to socialize and so will remain in the minds of people for a good while. So yeah, this is a behavioral pattern. People, if they see this summer there's gonna be agglomerations in the airports, that the airlines are gonna be struggling, that they don't know what is happening with, with their data, if they don't know what to do, people could travel again a lot by car, which we haven't seen that for a decade. When I was a child, that was the only way to travel, because there were not availability or connectivity by plane. And also the classic German tourists going to Southern Europe by car. Obviously low-cost travel made that completely obsolete, but we'll see that this summer again. Train, rail travel, we see that the night trains are coming back. Why? Okay, there is a sustainable agenda behind, a Green Deal 2030, very heavily promoted by the European institutions, and obviously supported by the government. You see in all this array of changes, we have also the consumer taking decisions. And how many of them will still thinking in the old pattern and mentality, and how many will like to explore new things? This is the €1 million question, because I'm not sure if tourism is gonna become much more sustainable so quick, or the moment there is a sense of normality, everybody's gonna go party. And this, with humans tend to forget. It's a survival mechanism that we have to. So I don't know about the speed of change. I'm sure about the change, but not about the speed.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when we talk about sustainability to our customers in a global fashion, that tends to be a little bit more at the top of the agenda with European destination than with Asian destinations, which I think is interesting. And it seems to us that it's true for destination and true for travelers. But I think at the end of the day, when I look at some Spanish destination here that have been suffering from over tourism, they're the one that has that most acute need for transforming the way the travel has, the traveler's experience and the tourism experience. Because sometimes we think about carbon footprint, but here we think about the social impact and the economical impact. If your economical impact is not properly distributed, a lot of people will start questioning tourism. And if from a social standpoint, it creates some situation where basically you have pushbacks, this is detrimental. So I mean, to your point, best tourism before being first tourism, obviously, yeah. So do you think there is one component in this equation? Over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of airlines getting rid of their aircrafts. But we anticipate that the demand will come back very, very actively. Do you think there's going to be an impact for DMO, or change the relationship between airlines and DMOs as well, or have an effect on demand/offer, and therefore we could see a price hike? How do you see this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aviation, not only this summer, but we've seen the trend in the last, even pre-COVID. There was talks about the consolidation of airlines and the disappearance of half of the European airlines. It was happening already. So this is not news. But the impact this is going to have, I think it's being underestimated, because it's all about capacity. We Europeans sadly say, we travel. 96% of European destinations suffer seasonality. 96 is practically all of them. Suffer seasonality, meaning that we all Europeans travel at the same time to the same places, and that obviously creates bottlenecks that people used to baptize with the fancy word of over tourism, which is to have too many people coming at the same place at the same time. And it was pretty predictable. It was not nobody needed rocket science, but nobody did the impact assessment of that on time. That's the difference. Now we have the possibility maybe to readjust, and I foresee, and this is my own prediction, but probably ForwardKeys data will also come, is that this summer we're going to have maybe issues of capacity, because some airlines are not going to be able to operate as quick as we think they can. There are also the issue of bottlenecks at gateways, meaning at airports. If you have to be now adding a layer of control, meaning that you have to present your QR code, believe it or not, but according to airline, that takes 2-3 minutes, each passenger, and that adds, like more time to the thing, and that affects to the slot management of the airport. And you see there is, I tend to call it the ketchup bottle effect, which is, like this summer at the beginning of July, we're going to have that kind of shake in the bottle, and then you have that kind of big drop coming out, and then we're going to struggle getting some ketchup out of the bottle, because some people will be maybe influenced by images on television of very crowded spaces or problems at airports and so on. Hopefully not, because the implementation time that we have till then is only 3.5 weeks, and we are all humans, and we know that airlines and airports are not particularly doing well, and they definitely don't want to have to invest in other gates to scan your thing, personal to prove if you are COVID free, and so on and so on and so on. So you see that it is a complex equation, but accessibility and connectivity for me are key. Not only this year. You mentioned many destinations, and in particular in the Mediterranean basin, we know about the prostitution of destinations to low-cost carriers, and sorry, if I'm explicit with this, but like it was a policy of subsidizing flights, to make people come to us to certain points. Yep. And that creates obviously like a very good balance for the places, because it creates employment, it creates image, it brings possibly also like citizens, because people get to know the places they didn't know, as a new kind of investment. But this is now at question. There is also regulation coming along. You've heard that in France, that low distance short distance flights will be banned. So everything that is less than 2 hours should be covered by train or by other modes of transport. That requires also, like, there's not enough seats on trains for that yet, so you see that it's not everything completely calculated yet. What do I have to, what I would like to say when I say, this is gonna be like a very a learning curve, and it's not gonna be like it's gonna be like a step by step approach, and we see some countries again acting very quick. Also, it's a matter of scalability. You cannot compare, Croatia with France, or Finland with Austria. They all have different idiosyncrasies, infrastructure, and also policy-making tools. I hope here, if I may be positive, is to more European approach, and hopefully if people criticize the European Union for many things, but maybe the answer for here is more Europe.
When we're looking at this summer, I think for a lot of European countries, we're going to be under 30% of 2019. We'll be releasing something about this. So hopefully that's a lack of ambition type of ramp up process toward a new normal. So maybe hopefully we can use this summer and the after summer as a way to reinvent ourselves and make travel efficient again. You got a point. Listen, before we move to question, I want to ask you a last one, which relates to EU. As I mentioned to you before we had this call, I was in a conference on Thursday and Friday where the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism announced that they would spending 3.4 billion. I mean, that was announced before to help the recovery and the transformation of travel in what is called digitalization and sustainability. And so I will spare you with the detail, because there's so much money involved, that there's so many initiatives, and actually that's one of the challenge there, which is who does what and how do we do it best. But in your opinion, in Europe in general, where should we use this money so that we can fast forward this road to reinvention that we just discussed?
I touched upon that briefly before, that I think it's the re-education of supply and demand. That's the first thing. Also, a smart infrastructure. I think we saw in the 90s, the hyper modernization of travel and tourism infrastructure, but without planning. Spain is famous for instance to having a lot of airports that are underused or practically empty, or with a flight a day, which obviously that demonstrate lack of planning. So it's nothing. So I think the answer to your question is a major coordination effort among stakeholders, being private and public. And don't forget again the subsidiarity principle. Those funds being EU funds, but whatever recovery funds will be also gathered by different EU governments. They would have to have sort of a similar pattern, because otherwise you will have, again, because of scalability and different tourism cycles in the geography of the European Union, you will have a lot of competitive advantages and disadvantages created, because it's not the same what you can do in Lithuania compared with what you can do in the region of Valencia. And this has a clear historical background that you can measure definitely with your data. But also, it has to do also with perception of the destination. Like in the 90s, the region of Valencia had, this boom and infrastructure, airport, museums, and making the region so attractive. So I think the word here, the key word is going to be reputation building too, because like a DMO arguably can say, okay, we have the best of this, best of that. But that's partially true, because this is a perception thing, and you don't know, you cannot control the perception always of people. But it's about reputation, is what you build even beyond tourism contribution. What are you doing also to recover, to have better plans, for your local communities? We defend the principle of better place to live, better place to visit. So if you have people happy in a place, maybe it's not the case of Valencia, where Valencia is a good place to work and live. It's just your people like also to visit, places that are like that. But that's not the case in many tourism destinations, where it's becoming hell to become a local, because because of the gentrification and because of. So I think the recovery funds have to do a lot in that direction, a lot of next generation. I think we are forgetting that tourism employs people with low qualifications, a lot of young people. It has to become also a business, in particular in southern Mediterranean countries, where it's so important, but even northern countries, it should become something much more aspirational. And these the funds should work in that direction, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo. Passing it over to the other Olivier. I'm sure he has some interesting question for us.
Well, I sure have questions that we received from the audience, a number of questions. Let me remind everybody that you can still ask some questions if you've got any. I'll bundle two questions we've received, one from Frank R and one from Attila. First question is, how are the ETC and ForwardKeys supporting the recovery? And the second question, which may be linked to this, is how do you think technology will change the travel landscape and the work of DMOs? Eduardo, do you want to?
Yeah, I can start saying that I think the close relationship between data providers and destinations is going to become they say data is the new gold, no, if you want. But for me, it's not even the data so important. There is data all over the place right now. I think there is a job, you guys are pioneers on this in this field, but it's interpretation of data. You need a translator of all this data into what you need. And then the customization, if you want, personalization to each DMO, because you cannot compare a DMO in Montenegro to one in northern Finland. So, and again, what are how can you apply? You can apply the same data bases and data sources to them. And again, moving out for us at TTC, what we see is that we've reached the threshold. We know enough about numbers in terms of quantification of things, but we are in nappies. We are in a baby state when it comes to qualification of things and to measure KPIs that go beyond numeric things, but are very much human, psychology driven. And this is where I think we need a lot of help with interpretation.
Yeah, I can add to this because you jump into the data part. And listen, I think that the world is going to be different from a DMO perspective. You can look at it the way you want, but until recently, DMO have been pretty blind about who's visiting them. So I could hear a lot of people saying that's not true, but allow me to say what I have to say. What are all the segmentation of which people are visiting your destination? I would nearly argue by day. Okay, what are they doing there? How do they spend their money? How do they behave? Why do they come to your destination? Why do they renew? Why don't they renew? Once you understand this and you can compare the profile of your visitors to any other destination that's really a competitor of yours, then you can decide how you want to reinvent and remodel the profile of tourists at your destinations. Okay, and then you can press your marketing buttons and decide, is the traditional marketing the way to go? Is the direct marketing the way to go? But in any case, if you can focus on those segmentation of tourists around the world to drag them to your destination, they bring a little bit of value, maybe more quantity, maybe better spending, maybe focus on some things that were not properly developed by this destination. This is all what technology is going to do to make it super simple. And part of our mandate is to provide those tools to the DMO so that there is much more, that BI and marketing become much more actionable with a positive spiral that should allow destination to perform better through the rating grid of sustainable tourism, of socially sustainable and economically profitable. That's what it is.
Olivier, that's a great segue towards the next question from Sonia. Do you think that sustainable tourism necessarily means less tourists?
I would say, if I may, yeah, I can start with that. I think it's about distribution of tourists. I think there is, everybody should have the right to travel and to try, to see different places. I almost see that, it's a human need, to move around, and we should encourage people, to visit different places, and also try to facilitate that, through social tourism initiatives and so on. I'm a huge advocate personally of this. However, as I mentioned before, the distribution of tourism it's not equal, and we see it even with the vaccination rollout. That's another problem that we have. There is the lack of equality on distribution of wealth, and these, in a globalized world, you see that it's not the problem of having too many people moving around. It's how you move them around and where to move them around and at which times. I'm a big fan of exploring alternatives, to different school holidays. Again, seasonality is something so artificially created. Why do we all go on holiday at the same time? I think it's not necessary. Now, new modes of work, teleworking, digital nomads, all these things it's already undergoing. This is a reality of things. Why should people be so constrained, to take their holidays always around those dates on Christmas, Easter, and summer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere or in Western Europe, but also in America and so on. So I think that we have to diversify that and to create societies that are more flexible, to distribute also leisure and working time and balance that in a better way that is also better to create wealth for the society as such. So it's not an easy task, because I think we come from industrial revolution that created the stop of factories in the summer, and that's why we all still going on holidays in July and August. But all those factories are, I think in 3-4 decades no longer open. So why are we still going on holiday those days?
Yeah. Well, the answer is because the kids go on holiday at the same period. When we set up ForwardKeys, we were so proud we could display all this data and processing all these millions of records, and then we could see a graph with like a huge peak, and then the customer says, why this peak? And we didn't know. We were already so happy that we could display a peak, and that speaks about what you were saying about qualitative versus quantitative. This was totally quantitative. So in fact, we started building an event database, and this event database, we always talked about volcano eruptions, geopolitical tensions, strikes, etc. But the root of it all, for whatever is leisure, is essentially kids' holiday. So we monitor kids' holiday around the world, right? So if we had to break something to allow a better distribution of people, that's what we need to break. How do we do it? I really don't understand. I don't know that. But I think to your point, over tourism, in a short period, limited number of places. Okay, so that obviously can be broken. What are we willing to do about it? I think that is the question. Yeah, there obviously are ways around it, and it reminds me that we have in the company somebody that spent her life traveling, and when we were in a meeting, we say, "Where are you?" "Ah, I'm in Kenya." Oh, pretty cool. So I do believe that we're going to have more and more of these people that we don't know where they are, but they work very efficiently and diligently. Yeah, they might be contributing to breaking that seasonal fences that are a very strong limiting factor to the development of our industry. Absolutely, but I believe that.
Am I mistaken in thinking that the colleague you have in mind is Chinese?
Yeah. How did you guess?
All right. Well, that
Maybe
leads
she's in
us to our
Peru
next
today,
question.
so don't say she's Chinese.
So a question from Jan Molnar, who's asking when you guys would think that Chinese traffic to Europe would be back, maybe at 50% of pre-crisis level. Any bet on this? Educated guess?
Yeah, I mean, Chinese
I know the
tourism.
date.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know the date. I'm just hesitating on the hour. I was just joking. You can take that question, Eduardo. Sorry for this.
This is a pure political decision, Olivier. So it's obviously the EMA, the European Medicine Agency, it's at this moment, proving if Sinovac and Sinopharm will be admitted, that's as approved vaccines in the European Union. You know that even some EU countries have been vaccinated with those, such as Hungary and some other
For sure.
non-Schengen like Serbia, Montenegro, and partially Croatia too. So this is a geopolitical question more than a tourism question. Obviously, the EU is open to reopen to China as long as we have reciprocity. The EU or Sino-European relations are very much based on balance. And so far so good. I think the Chinese has from what we see from data from you guys and from other sources is that there is a huge appetite from China to travel again. They're traveling domestically like crazy already, but really like crazy.
Yep.
So that appetite is obviously latent there in the moment they open airports to international destinations. They will be coming back, and again, to be managed again, it's something that we initiated back in 2018. And the Chinese market it's a market that changes overnight. To understand them, you have to be very, very much aware of their societal changes and socio-demographic technological changes. They're heavily well informed, technologically savvy. They have everything on their phones and so on. It is probably, I always say that the world of tourism is shifting east, very slowly but steady, and the center of this, it's going undoubtedly towards China. And whoever doesn't want to understand and doesn't want to see the truth on it, I think will probably regret it in a decade. But coming back to the very question, I think sooner than later, I think the EU it's very much willing to reopen to third markets under obviously the conditions that we'll have here: proof of vaccination, proof of immunity, proof of negative PCR test.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
To this, we would just add one component. To that, I would just add one component, which ties to the travel retail component of it, which we've seen a Spaniard, oh my God, Chinese consuming locally. The Chinese government investing or allowing the huge investment when it comes to domestic duty-free, if you will, which are somewhat replacing those part of the travel that the Chinese were doing outside of China. And obviously, the Chinese government loves that this money is actually remains domestic. So, you know, as Eduardo was saying, there are some political ramification to this, and seeing Chinese people spending their money domestically is one component of that equation as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
We'll see.
Final question from our audience. Focus on human resources. Do you think that human resources may be a bottleneck for recovery? Maybe because the right staff may not be present in the right place at the right time, or also because there's a new need for skilled workers that the market have not anticipated. Eduardo?
For the travel industry, you mean? For industry?
Yes, for the travel industry.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
You
I think I'm just gonna try to picture this in an example that I saw. I went last week to Portugal, to the southern part of Portugal, and I was chatting with local authorities and with national authorities. You know, they were struggling finding people again because a simple reason, because of putting the industry on hold for so long. You know, people had to find alternatives to eat. So, and you know, to getting someone back to a job that is normally underpaid from a job that it was very difficult to find, that's a hard thing, you know, to do. And you don't want to ask someone, you know, come back to work in my hotel when you have found again work maybe in construction or in another business, which, you know, obviously it's not so badly hit by the crisis. You know, it's about our security, and also, you know, it's also the flexibility of social security systems in Europe. You know, we have obviously very protective laws here, you know, when it comes to fire and hire, and you know, there is not that kind of flexibility like in other markets, and this is going to create a lot of competitiveness here. You know, we see that if Europe, you know, doesn't open soon enough to the United States, and other regions are going to profit from the, you know, we see it in the Caribbean. Mexico is booming already in terms of bookings from US. Why? You know, because, you know, it's just so easy to restart there when it comes, and you know, because, you know, Europe, thank God, we have a, you know, like a welfare system in place, you know, also to protect people from miseries. And so I guess, you know, this comes also with a hopefully more freedom also to entrepreneurs, you know, to in the future, you know, to have also possibilities to hire people short term. But this is a very, very concrete dialogue, you know, with the social partners and with the corporations. I'm not an expert on that, but I've seen, and coming back to my example, that it's very challenging for this summer to get people back to the industry because of the uncertainty.
Actually, you know what? I'd like to link this to what Eduardo was saying earlier that relates to, you know, we, the travel industry in general are falling a little bit short in offering a true career perspective to all the people involved, okay? And can't answer for the whole industry, but I think that's probably something we should think about, okay? But when it comes to DMOs and what I foresee as the next step, if you will, for DMO, BI, marketing, and so forth, I think the technology is going to evolve very much. And actually, talking with Spanish authorities here, what we're seeing is that this is really getting complicated, okay? There was a time you were trying to speak positively about your destination as the lead, you know, guy for DMO in ayuntamiento, you know, like here in Spain. And suddenly you have to become an analyst, a subject matter expert in online marketing. You know, there's lots of things here which require more people more education, better education, and yeah, a true career path. So I think we should think about our industry as a more engaging, if you will, for new people coming on the market and looking for exciting industry where you can have success, money, and true career path.
Yeah.
But I think that
Maybe
might be part of the new equation.
adding to that, tourism, and this has been analyzed by WTTC and other guys, it's one of the industries most difficult to decentralize, or you need people on site doing the work, because you need an experience, and for that you still need the human there. Obviously, technology is going to provide a lot of help, but there is that, maybe that's the base of tourism too, that is still pretty much inherent to the humankind. But other financial services, banking, other kind of corporation life, even pharmaceutical industry, it's very much decentralized, and in production lines are, it's different. This is a very human experience-driven industry, which requires the presence of people, and it cannot be done only by a cell phone, robot, or artificial intelligence. And this is where the challenge relies. You have to keep, as Olivier was saying, an attractiveness of the industry while paying decent salaries, proposing good career patterns, and having a resilience in your workforce. Otherwise, if you don't invest, from nothing comes nothing.
Eduardo, Olivier, thank you so much for being with us today. I think it was a really honest and open discussion. I found that very interesting. I hope our audience did as well. I'd like to invite the audience to answer our quick poll so that we can understand better whether this webinar was informative and helpful to your business. So please fill in the poll. I'd also like to remind the audience that ForwardKeys regularly publishes insights and fresh data on our website, forwardkeys.com. I'd like to invite you to check it out every now and then. Thank you once more to our guests for being with us today, and see you in a future edition of ForwardKeys and Friends. Thank you very much.
Eduardo, thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
My pleasure.